Hi guys, Grumpsy here. Kind of a combo video today, and some big news I want to share about myself, but we'll do that at the end. First, the main part of this video is going to be kind of my wish list for Resto Shaman. 10.2.5 patch comes out on Tuesday, and nothing's been really announced yet in terms of class balance or even dungeon balance. So I made a little wish list here. Maybe they'll get to these at some point in the future, or maybe they won't. So if you see here, kind of the healer meta right now is Mistweaver, Discipline Priest, Resto Druid, and these three specs kind of dominate the whole scene right now, and we'll get into why that is. They're all very good. Now, what's not so good is that if you're one of these other three healer specs, and you want to be in title range, which is top 1.1% of players, you're borderline unplayable in these high keys. These three specs are just so much stronger than these other three. And that's just a fact. The statistics show it. People that play these specs will tell you that. Whereas in Season 2, the balance was a little bit more rounded, you see. Even Holy Priest, or I guess this is just Priest in general, but Preservation was being played, and Mistweaver was very weak in Season 2, that's correct. But you see these, it's kind of a more balanced curve downwards, whereas these three dominate, and then these three are really not too viable right now. And yes, this is just for high keys, 26, 27 plus, upwards towards 30, 31, which is the highest that people are doing right now. If you're doing a plus 20, a plus 22 with your guild, you should be able to play anything. It's only when you start pushing the limits that you see the limits of the spec that you're playing, right? So I'm a Resto Shaman focused individual, so I'm going to talk from that perspective. And I'm going to dive into why I think Resto Shaman is down here, why it's not being picked at the top level. And if you're a Resto Shaman player, you've probably, I struggle with this too. It's hard to get invited to groups, man. It just is. The first thing that I've noticed the most while playing Resto Shaman this season, and this has been true in the past as well, in previous patches and previous expansions, this has been true. I felt this before. Resto Shaman is not a haste-based healer. You do not want too much haste on your Resto Shaman. It's a spec that stacks crit and verse, and so you want to get away with not as much haste as the other specs like Mistweaver, Resto Druid are all haste focused specs. Now in Mythic Plus, things happen very, very quickly. Someone can dip down to 10% health in one attack, and it's your responsibility as a healer to deal with that. And as a non-haste based healer, there are certain moments and instances of damage that are very, very difficult to deal with for Resto Shaman. And you'll see some coming up here in Everbloom where this is just a hard dungeon to heal in general, but for a healer that doesn't have kind of a snap heal, that's what I like to call it, is something instant that will either top up a player or prevent them from dying. The best thing we have would be to fire off a healing surge. And that involves two things. One, that involves you reacting in time. That involves you being able to get a full healing surge cast off, which for me at 20% haste is 1.3 seconds. And it involves me not having to move, right? If there's something under my feet I have to move, that person may die. So another issue, it's kind of branching off from here, is I'd say Resto Shaman currently requires too much setup to be played to its full potential, and full potential includes things like Cloudburst Totem and using Primordial Wave well, and these are things that you have to set up 5, 6, even 8 globals ahead of time, and that's 10 seconds into the future that you have to plan, where in these high Mythic Plus keys, things are happening so quickly now, and Resto Shaman's ability to plan ahead doesn't seem to yield the kind of results that you would expect for planning something 8 globals ahead of time, right? Okay, you can fill up a Cloudburst. It may heal everybody by 15% of their health, right? If you get a 1 million Cloudburst on a party of 5, that's about 10 to 15% health for everybody. So it's just not. It doesn't feel that impactful. At the same time, you have to do it to play to its potential. So I'd say, to sum that up, there's just too many globals to spend, and for a non-haste healer, it's just hard when not a lot of those globals feel like they're doing anything. I should mention that in season 1 they gave us this wonderful talent called Tidebringer, which really put Shaman on the map in season 1 and made it one of the most popular specs towards the end of the season. And in doing this, they really tried to address what I'm talking about right now, which is that Shaman didn't have any way to respond to incoming damage in a reasonable amount of time, right? And so having a chain heal with a shorter cast time was their solution to that. And at the time, it felt really, really strong, and it was. And nowadays, it just doesn't feel enough compared to the power creep that kind of Mistweaver and Resto Druid, etc. have gotten. Resto Shaman just isn't there with them. That's just the bottom line. I think another area that Arsham has really suffered in this season is that our tier set just doesn't, it really doesn't do anything in Mythic Plus. This kind of the title, whatever it's called, the random nature of it is not the type of healing we like to have in Mythic Plus. Now it's okay in Raid. It's a good throughput. It's a good throughput ability where you get some extra Riptide healing on the Raid as a whole. But in Mythic Plus, we're not using Riptide as a heal over time, right? Yes, we have to keep it up on all our players to optimize our gameplay, but it's not the amount of healing that Riptide does is not an important part of our dungeon healing, right? And the reason is just what I was talking about earlier, is that the incoming damage is so sudden and so dangerous that a Riptide heal over time is not going to save a person, right? You're just firing off healing surges, chain heals, and cloudbursts when you need it. And Riptide is kind of, I would say, fourth on the list there. So my wish list here would be some kind of major update or overhaul to the tier set, which probably won't happen at this point. But either tweak the numbers so that it's much more noticeable in Mythic Plus, because right now it's just like a 2 or 3% increase to HPS. That and or kind of give it an active ability. That would be pretty cool, where you can kind of activate this tidal reservoir and it can do something. It can kind of like release a bunch of healing, or it can, go into your cloudburst or something. I don't know. I don't care. But something more active. This kind of passive under the surface healing is just useless in Mythic Plus. That's my opinion, but I think it's useless. Another major issue with Resto Shaman, if you compare it to the top 3 specs that we spoke about earlier, and this has been an issue really since since the inception of Arsham and Mythic Plus, damage and healing are completely separate for us. Even though Acid Rain is a significant part of our damage, again, with the same kind of idea of Riptide, Acid Rain is very passive damage. You put your healing rain down and it damages the mob slowly. And it's kind of what higher end players would describe as padding, which is it's damage that doesn't actively help you in the dungeon, right? Like, sure, you can put Acid Rain down on 6 targets and it'll damage them slowly, but really kind of priority damage is what you want. And not only that, Acid Rain is target capped, right? So you can only have it on 6 targets. Well, what happens when you pull 12, like in Everbloom? There's packs of 12 or 15 mobs. Well, Acid Rain's only hitting 6, right? Whereas if you go to a Mistweaver, they are uncapped with the Spinning Crane Kick. Does a lot of damage. They have other abilities that do a lot of damage. Resto Druid actually does a lot of single target damage. They have Cat Form. They have all this stuff. Discipline Priest, their whole kit is about dealing damage and healing at the same time, right? So if you look at these 3 specs, that is one thing that really sets them apart from the other 3 is the ability to deal damage at the same time. Resto Shaman just doesn't have it, right? Part of the struggle that I've had this season is I have to decide when to attack and when to heal. And that's a very frustrating thing when I look at the other specs and they're doing both at the same time, right? So that's always been on my wish list as a Resto Shaman. And they tried to address it with Acid Rain. It's not the right answer. They keep buffing Acid Rain. I don't care about Acid Rain. I want something that damages and heals at the same time. For example, a chain heal that, like, you target it. Let's say the chain heal goes through the mobs. This is kind of like higher. This would be like high skill cap, like MOBA stuff, right? Let's say, someone's standing on the other side, like you chain heal your tank. The chain heal travels through the mobs and damages the mob somehow, or puts a dot on them, like a water dot on the enemies. This is much more active gameplay, right? It's more interesting. Acid Rain you just put on the ground and it just sits there. It's just not it's not a lot of fun. And going back to the first point, which is that we're kind of a non-haste healer, Acid Rain can be, almost a 2-second cast for a lot of us, and it doesn't feel worth it to put down, even though we have to for damage. And really, the main reason is it doesn't do that much healing in Mythic Plus, right? Again, like Riptide, it's a very slow, passive heal that people have to stand in if you want to be healed by it, and it just doesn't do that much healing in the grand scheme of things. Yet another issue here that I've been having this season is problems with mana. And they did adjust mana a little bit this season, but really, I've had significant mana problems in a lot of these dungeons, and some of these bosses are 6-7 minutes long on Tyrannical, for example, Iridicron, and this boss right here that you're watching can be up to 6 or 7 minutes long on high Tyrannical keys. Final and I think most important issue here, and really the thing I've been wishing for the most for Resto Shaman for a long time, is the lack of an external cooldown, an external defensive cooldown that we can place on another player. And they tried to address this by giving us the talent where Earth Shield reduces damage taken by 6%. This is pretty good, and in high level dungeons where people are getting one shot by boss abilities, by trash abilities, it can be a good thing to rotate or shield onto your squishier DPS players. This is something you'll have to do when you step into 27s and 28s on Tyrannical weeks, for example. The fact remains is that we just don't have an external CD. Again, these top 3 specs, they all have an external, right? Life Cocoon, Pain Suppression, and Iron Bark. It's called Iron Bark or Iron Skin. I think it's called Iron Bark. And these are both good for tanks. Tanks like these, DPS players like these, is important things to have in dungeons, especially nowadays where things, we're doing keys at a level where people are getting one shot from full health. And so it's important to have these abilities. And really, and I'll go back to all the other points by saying this, is that the main issue here is a lack of flexibility for Resto Shaman. What an external cooldown provides you is flexibility in your party comp, in your playstyle, in the pulls you can make. You're more flexible when you have an external cooldown in your hands, right? Something can happen, you can pop an external on somebody, whereas we just don't have that. It's actually quite uncomfortable for other people to play with, is something that I kind of figured out over the past couple months. Watching other people play with Mistweavers and Resto Druids, is that there's a level of comfort there in knowing that something bad is coming and you'll get an external on your head, right? You'll get a big green bubble around you, or you'll get an Iron Bark, something like that. Let's say somebody misses a kick. A great healer will be able to save a person from a Soul Bolt in Waycrest Manor, for example, by throwing an external onto them. So that's pretty much it. Let's take a look back and try to sum up the things I'm wishing for. I know Christmas is past, so we might have to wait until next Christmas, unfortunately. But I wish for a spec that is more interactive and flexible. And a lot of that may come from having more haste, having a more haste-oriented build. Somehow Blizzard can work this into the spec. And I also really wish for an external cooldown. I think to have a viable healer, you really need an external cooldown. That's just how it is. That's just how it is these days with the way these dungeons are tuned. And lastly, we need some kind of reduction in button bloat, as it's called, which is we have a lot of buttons that we need to press. We got to keep Riptide on everybody. You have to keep Acid Rain down to do damage. Sometimes you have to do Chain Lightning, and sometimes you have to do Chain Heal, and it's very kind of frustrating for a lot of people. That's my sense, at least. So we need kind of a reduction in the amount of useless globals that are have to be pressed here. The spec needs a little bit of streamlining to resemble the other specs that I've been talking about. And these three at the top, Disc Priest has been streamlined recently, and that's one of the reasons it's so strong right now. Is that it's a much more streamlined spec than it used to be. Same with Mistweaver, which is honestly, and I'll talk about this in a second, feels like I'm sitting in a race car. You know what? Let's just go there right now to the big news, which is that unfortunately, I have made the decision to swap off of Resto Shaman for the foreseeable future, at least for the rest of the tier. I've thought long and hard about this. It's been a kind of a painstaking realization for me that I do need to swap in order to kind of play the way I want to play, which is I want to play with a bunch of people, and I don't want to feel like I'm letting them down or that they're having to work harder because of me. And I did feel that way when I was on my shaman, is that the other four members, it kind of felt like they were working harder than they usually do because there was a shaman in the party. And that a lot of that is because of me. You know, I'm not the best player in the world, and I never said I was. There's certainly people better than me that are pushing higher on Resto Shaman than me, and you know, props to them, really. But for me, I don't have all that time to dedicate to the game these days. I kind of want to play one of these more streamlined specs, as I was talking about earlier. And so I've made the decision to swap to Mistweaver, which is always a spec that I've enjoyed and has never been good. And now it's good, and I want to play it. And stepping into it, as I said, it feels like stepping into a race car, man. It's just like, I feel like I'm driving a Ferrari suddenly, or, it's just such a much more fast-paced and streamlined spec to play, and really I'm having a good time on the Mistweaver. So it's not to say I'm abandoning the shaman, and I hope people don't see it that way. I certainly will try to play shaman whenever I can. I'm definitely going to try to push title on it towards the end of the season. But first things first, I want to kind of reestablish my position as as a Mistweaver here with my team and with my friends, and kind of get to learn this spec, because it is stronger. That's just how it is. It's stronger right now. So yeah, any questions? Shoot me a comment. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still gonna play the shaman. It's just not gonna be my focus right now. I'm gonna focus on the Mistweaver, and I will get back to the shaman when I get back to it.